couple of days ago, I went to see a movie at the movie theater. On Tuesdays, we have cheap movie nights here in my town. And we went to see Snow White. Like so many movies were showing, but for some reason we chose Snow White. I think I chose Snow White because of some sort of nostalgia. You know, one of the first, color movies or fairy tale movies from Disney was Snow White, made in 1937, I think. And now it's like 2025, so almost 100 years ago. For 100 years, Snow White has been playing, like, there's been movies made about this character, the Snow White and Seven Dwarfs. So many people have grown up with this story and the Disney stories, and there were so many princesses, I think I always wanted to be a princess because there were not that many movies about princess, There was Aladdin, of course, but I don't know. I always wanted to be a princess rather than prince. Yeah, it was a good movie. It brought back so many memories, and I wanted to share this little story of these 8 little figurines that my late mother purchased somewhere. For the first 7 years of my life, we lived in this one-room apartment, the 4 of us, and we had a TV, so that was like a huge window out of that one room. Even though we were in that one room, I watched so much TV just to kind of escape that room, I guess, or, to see the world. Later on, I started reading, and I read a lot to escape, again, the reality, or not even to escape, but just to see something else. So when I was 7 years old, we moved to an apartment from which I would later on, after my elementary school, move out and go into the world, and here I am now. My sister and my father still live in that apartment. So when we moved into that apartment, we brought our TV with us, and soon afterwards we bought another color TV, and my mother got these figurines somewhere, and it was a figurine of Snow White and 7 Dwarfs. The dopey and happy and angry, or whatever they're all called, the 7 characters. They all have their names in alphabetical order, or blah, blah, blah. I just remember that from the movie. So every day while watching TV, I remember my mother and I used to watch this American soap opera called Dynasty. It was like 1,000 or 1,200, episodes. We watched like more than 1,000 episodes of Dynasty. My God, man. So, and God knows what else. But every time we watched something, we would watch Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs because they were placed on top of the TV. So obviously, that Snow White and the dwarfs are deeply engraved into my memory. I played with these figurines so much. Interesting, right? It's funny how some things like just become a part of your core memories, right? Everything that you are is based on that. So no wonder Snow White has been my favorite story. Although I like Cinderella. I spoke in one of my videos about Cinderella, how that story is so different, was written so differently than we know it now. I think that they had to water down the version a little bit because it was way too cruel, honestly. Nevertheless, yeah. So I'm going to have to ask my sister and my father if they remember where my mother got the figurines and why they were so important. Yes, I paid the price to be who I am. Yeah. So this TV, we had one of the first color TVs in our neighborhood, and we had a VCR player, video cassette player, made by a Japanese company called Shibaki. To this day, I don't know anything about this company Shibaki, right? But I know Toshiba and like blah blah blah. But Shibaki at that time was, I don't know. We somehow bought that one, and we were the first in the neighborhood to have that Shibaki. It was one of the noisiest things ever, right? You could put a tape in it and it would like take boom, then like make these noises and everything. So if you were to watch something late at night, like I would, everybody in the house would know, in my apartment would know that I am watching TV or watching video cassette. So they would say, "What are you watching? Where'd you get the videotape?" Because there was no videotapes at home. It wasn't, I lived in a small hometown. It wasn't like here when you had like a Blockbusters or something like that. You could go to a big store and rent and blah, blah, blah. No, we lived in a small city, and there was really not that many stores where you could rent videotapes. So my classmates, my friends' parents, decided to open like a little like a video rental shop in the house. And so I would go from my home to their home, say hi to my friends, they rent a tape, bring it home to watch. And of course, it was a small town. It is a small town, so my friends' parents knew my parents, of course, and blah, blah, blah. And I would go in and sometimes like look at all these like Rocky, Rambo, Terminator movies. But there was a section next to it with like porno movies. And I would go there, miss, I would like to rent one of these movies, but maybe you will tell my mom and my dad, and I would be very embarrassed. She was like, "No, I'm a businesswoman. Many children rent them anyways. Back in my day, you could buy cigarettes, alcohol, or rent porn movies, even though you were only like 14 years old." That's amazing. Imagine now, which is funny because as a 14-year-old, like you have all the pornography available to you on the internet anyways. Yet we don't talk about Bruno. We don't talk about these things because nobody wants to talk about that. But yeah, it was totally okay for me to rent these tapes. The funny thing was that my friend's mother was a beautiful woman, so of course I was attracted to her. But like made everything so much more awkward, like renting like videotapes from her. Or I don't know, maybe it was more interesting. I don't know. It was what it was. And anyways, I was able to get these tapes, and here and there I would buy some magazines. But you couldn't always rent them and bring them. And the thing is, when you live with your mother and father and a sister, you don't really have the time or the space to watch these. Like sometimes I would rent them and not be able to watch them because I would fall asleep, I would be tired, I have school, blah blah blah. My parents would be up, so I would be able to watch them. However, in our living room where the TV was placed, our color TV and the Shibaki VCR, above it was our house or home library, and we had all the books by, Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, all the communist writers, and some Yugoslav writers as well. my mother used to buy like 1 meter of books because they can fit into that particular shelf. And there was one writer in Bosnia and Herzegovina who wrote so many books, so you could buy 1 meter of his books to fit them into the space. So we had all these communist writers and all the communist books, and I read all of them. I was an avid reader. I had, a golden membership in our city library several years in a row because I read most books, that year. It was definitely a way for me to escape. I think I had a happy childhood, but honestly, come to think of it, it was a confusing time, just like anybody's childhood, especially puberty. Growing up in former Yugoslavia was tough, tough, and then we had a war. So, double tough, double tough. So, books to me were a way, like, kind of out of all of that, and they opened these new worlds that later on I got a chance to explore and visit, and I'm glad I did. My experiences are so much more important to me than all my material possessions because nobody can take that away from you. So yeah, the TV, the Snow White figurines and the Seven Dwarfs, Karl Marx and Engels, and one videotape. So I think my parents bought this videotape from the same lady, same store. I mean, there was nowhere else to buy it. And they kept it there. I remember one evening I came back home. I was in military college. So I came home for like some sort of vacation. I was in my uniform and everything, and I entered my apartment, and there was my parents and I think uh, three other couples were there watching. It was funny. But whatever, like nobody had the VCR or the tape, so they wanted to see this, so it was kind of like interesting. Um, I survived the unsurvivable. Exactly. Thank you. Yeah. So one night I discovered the tape. The best of both worlds. You had the Eastern communist philosophy and one Western tape, which was Debbie Does Dallas, one of the most famous porno movies ever made. And I studied communism and pornography thoroughly every night. First I would read a little bit, and then after the parent would fall asleep, I would silently insert Debbie Does Dallas into Shivaki. And I mean, my parents must have known. They heard definitely, because like I said, this is the noisiest freaking VCR ever. It's like washing machine rather than like a VCR. But I think my parents probably thought like, yeah, I don't want to explain to him anything about birds and bees and whatnot. Here's a tape, watch and find out all about it. Which is funny. This is how most children discover about sex, through these tapes, through pornography, which is readily available. It's not okay. Before they even hold hands and explore love and each other, that they learn all about this raw sex. I mean, in order for you to engage in such sexual activities as Debbie did, you really have to know your partner really well. You can't immediately get into that unless you have sex with a sex worker, and that's probably something different. That's also not love. Nevertheless, Debbie Does Dallas and Karl Marx and Snow White with the Japanese Shivaki, you know, VCR, the former Yugoslavia. Years later, the war happened and I got separated from my family. We didn't see each other for like 10 years because we were on the opposite sides during the war. And the only way for me safely to go back home was to actually immigrate to Canada, get a Canadian citizenship, and show up with the Canadian passport so that can I have some security. When I first moved to Canada or here to Newfoundland, uh, we also had a VCR, and I went to a video store. First time I went in, of course, I went to see some action movies. And I find Debbie Does Dallas too. So I called my old man and told him, hey man, I found Debbie Does Dallas Part 2. And he was like pretending not to know what I was talking about. What Debbie? What Dallas? What are you talking about? Such is life. Especially now that my father has become more religious, you know, during the war, everybody switched from communism to religion because it was almost like mandatory, you know, in order to justify the war. So yeah, here in Canada also, Debbie Part 2. Many years later, now as a grown-up adult man, I moved to South Korea and I was living in this part of town where there was like a what do we call Luna Park, amusement park, and the Koreans decided to scrap that amusement park and dry out this pond lake that was there and build like 30 buildings, brand new apartment complex, put a different lake there, and you know, make like walkways, like beautiful new neighborhood. And I knew that was going to happen. I was so sentimentally connected with that lake because I used to take, you know, my date to that lake. We would be in my cars watching that lake and making out. It was pretty cool. I had a lot of fun in South Korea. And of course, then I got married and it was different. So I really wanted to kind of like, you know, ride my bicycle one more time around that neighborhood before they shut everything down and turn it into this like brand new complex. It took them like, I'd say like a couple of years, not even 6 months. They moved the pond, they moved the amusement park, built the buildings. Wow, like it just looks amazing now. But it was so kind of like, it was different before. It was almost like rural at that time. So I rode my bicycle on these roads, seaside roads. There was not that many cars. In the middle of a road, there was a videotape. So for some reason, I was like, I pick up this tape and I go back to my apartment. And I had a VCR. Like somehow the TV that came with my apartment had a VCR. At that time, there was no VCRs in South Korea. Nobody was watching videotapes really. But for some reason, I had all that. So I insert this tape into that VCR, and it is Debbie Does Dallas 2000, the third part. 3 continents, 3 Debbies, same Debbie. My goodness, how many partners she had in all these movies. She probably had more partners than I read books. Amazing. So, movies have been a very important part of my life, you know. So, from Snow White to Debbie. I don't know, you know, what to tell you, but I've had such an amazing upbringing, you know, from these early days in my apartment with Karl Marx and Snow White and Debbie, and then Canada and then South Korea, and here again. Yeah, so nostalgia, that's something that I really find interesting and amusing. Uh, Thank you so much for listening, for being here with me. Have a great night and go see Snow White. I highly recommend it.